We've spoken of many people on this channel who have exposed Epstein and Dirty Hollywood over the years. Mel Gibson, Justin Bieber, Roseanne Barr. But in today's video, we're going to be talking about people that you've never heard of before. Thanks for subscribing to the channel. My coffee's empty, and I'm sad about it. Hopefully yours isn't. Let's dive in.
From narrating firsthand experiences
and have with Jeffrey Epstein while Ghislaine Maxwell was participating as well.
Having raw photographs as proof of the assaults, here are celebrities and insiders who tried to warn us about Jeffrey Epstein. Number 1. Marla Maples. Marla Maples isn't someone most people think of when the Epstein story comes up. She spent most of the 90s known as the woman who broke up Donald Trump's first marriage, then became his second wife, and then quietly faded from the tabloid spotlight after their divorce in 1999. She was an actress and model who ran in New York's high society crowd. Her work, dinner parties, and celebrity friends all kind of mixed together, and everyone seemed to know everyone. And it's that world, specifically the one orbiting Mar-a-Lago, the Manhattan elite, where this story actually starts. By the mid-90s, Jeffrey Epstein had already spent years working his way into the upper echelons of that scene. He was presenting himself as this mysterious, brilliant financier, and nobody could quite explain where his money came from or what he actually did. But that seemed to make him more interesting to people.
Yeah, I mean, this was how the network was being founded, right? This is how all of these people were coming together back in the early 90s. And Trump's ex-wife was just a part of that ecosystem back then. So she definitely has information to tell.
Not less. He was moving through the same circles as Trump, attending the same events, showing up at the same clubs. The two men had a genuine social friendship going back years, and that meant Epstein was a recurring presence in Maples' life too, whether she wanted him to be or not. And by all accounts, she did not want him to be. Servers and staff who worked at Mar-a-Lago during that period have since told reporters that Maples was openly uncomfortable around Epstein, calling him wrong and off, not in a dramatic scene-making way. She wasn't confronting him publicly or making accusations. She went as far as telling Trump directly that she didn't want him associating with Epstein, that her gut was telling her something was fundamentally not right about the man.
Look at this picture right here. Let's just pause for a second. Trump, Epstein, 2 young children, it's probably Trump's children, I don't know. But just knowing what we know today, no matter whose kids those are, that's a disturbing picture.
But Trump didn't distance himself. The friendship continued, and the social obligations that came with being his wife meant Maples still found herself in the same rooms as Epstein. There's a photo from 1993 where both Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell were seen on Trump and Maples' wedding at the Plaza Hotel. Whatever Maples was feeling privately, it wasn't translating into any kind of public break from him, because it couldn't. He was her husband's friend, and in that social ecosystem, that was that. What makes her story worth paying attention to isn't that she did something dramatic or went on record, or tried to blow the whistle in any formal sense. She didn't. She instead seemed to have picked up on something in the early 90s the rest of the world wouldn't reckon with for another decade or more.
You know, Howard Stern was just in that image. How is he not coming forward with something? He's the mouthpiece of the world. He has no problem saying anything. Why hasn't he spoken up? I mean, he was clearly in that image at an event with Epstein.
Investigative journalists have looked closely at the Epstein story for years. One of them is Vicky Ward. His early reporting was some of the first major work on the subject. Reporters from outlets like The Guardian, The New York Times also dug into the social circle around Jeffrey Epstein. By talking to former staff and people who were part of that world, reporters pieced together what things were like behind the scenes. Those accounts often described Marla Maples as one of the few people there who openly said she didn't trust Jeffrey Epstein. There's also a strange detail that later surfaced from Epstein's own emails. In messages he sent to reporters years later, he claimed that he and Donald Trump once had a $10,000 bet during Maples' pregnancy with Tiffany Trump. According to Epstein, the bet was about whether the baby would be a boy or a girl. It's the kind of detail that illustrates just how embedded Epstein was in that circle. Not a casual acquaintance, but someone present for personal, private moments in their lives. Maples has never really addressed the specific details about her warnings publicly. She's largely stayed quiet in the whole subject, and the information that exists comes from the people around her at the time, rather than from her directly.
You have to wonder why. I mean, I don't really wonder why. She's probably very scared to come out with this information, as many people are, which is why so many people don't say anything, but she was right in the mix of it, on the arm of Trump, who was friends with Epstein, and if Epstein was at the wedding, they clearly had some kind of a relationship that was more than business.
She's never positioned herself as someone who tried to sound an alarm, but the picture that emerges from those accounts is of a woman who, in a room full of people who were either dazzled by Epstein or indifferent to whatever he might be, was quietly and persistently telling anyone who would listen that something about him wasn't right. Nobody listened. And like Marla, who chose to keep her distance and quietly warn people behind the scenes, not everyone stayed in the sidelines. Number 2. Maria Farmer. Maria Farmer was a young visual artist trying to build a career in New York in the mid-90s. She had genuine talent and serious ambitions, and like a lot of artists at that stage in their lives...
Whoa, look at this picture. How many faces do you recognize? Is that Maxwell right there? Looks like it. Some very familiar faces in this piece of art.
Toilet, bed, toilet, bed. I'm like, I am never going to use the restroom here, and I'm never going to sleep here.
Maria Farmer was already uncomfortable by what she was seeing while working for Giuffre Epstein. The environment around him felt increasingly strange, and the situation kept getting worse. But in 1996, things crossed a much darker line. Maria later said that she and her younger sister Annie, who was 16 at the time, were sexually assaulted by Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Maria Farmer then went to the authorities. On August 26, 1996, she called the NYPD and reported what had happened. She told them about the assault, and she also reported that Epstein had stolen intimate photographs she had taken of her sisters for her art. The NYPD told her the incidents crossed jurisdictions and referred her to the FBI.
Which I'm sure the FBI didn't do anything either.
She called the FBI. Then she called a second FBI office. In those calls, she laid out what she had witnessed. She also told them that Epstein had threatened her, that he had made it clear he would, in her words, burn her house down if she talked. However, the FBI did not open an investigation. Farmer spent years after that largely on her own with what she knew, telling her story to journalists and advocates while the official record stayed quiet. Maria Farmer turned to her art to process and share what she went through. In works like the painting pictured, she uses vivid, chaotic imagery filled with trapped or falling figures, surreal objects, and symbolic elements to represent trauma, abuse, and the confusing, controlling world she experienced. Her visual storytelling lets her make sense of her experiences and speak out, reclaiming her voice after surviving Giuffre Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell's exploitation. It wasn't until the release of government documents under the Epstein Files Transparency Act in late 2025 that her account was formally corroborated. One of the released documents is a handwritten report by the FBI dated September 3, 1996, less than 2 weeks after Farmer made her calls. That report describes a professional artist alleging that Epstein stole photographs of her 12 and 16-year-old sisters and was planning to sell them. The document confirms that the report existed, that someone wrote it down, and that it went nowhere. There's one more piece of this that came out in interviews Farmer gave around the time of the document release. Where she was working for Epstein in 1995, she had an encounter at his office that stuck with her.
What's he doing here? I'm supposed to be working for Epstein and interviewing with him. Why is Donald Trump here? And he walked up about, a few feet from me and just stood over me in a very imposing way and looked at me like he was in on some secret or something. It was really weird, like smirking, kind of. And I felt threatened, so I made an ugly face. And when I made that ugly face, Epstein walked out from the offices. Trump's standing here, I'm here, and he walks out of his office and he goes, "Oh, no. He was laughing at me. And he goes, "She's not here for you. Follow me." And he escorts him in to this other room. And I always wondered, who was she in there? Was someone in there, right? And I have no way of knowing, nothing. But I felt very intimidated because I had on running shorts and I was vulnerable, sweaty, just a nobody.
When she was talking to the FBI in 1996, she didn't just report the assault and the photographs. She also urged them to look at Epstein's high-profile associates, and Trump was among the names she raised.
Yeah, something bad. Then is told, "Oh, no, she's not for you." Then he goes into another room, which you would assume there's another girl in there that dirty face was intended for. Now, I'm saying dirty face. I could be off right there, but that's what I'm picturing. There's no proof that that's what it actually was. But it's definitely a strange situation. And something else worth noting, the artwork that she shared. She's an artist. She shared exposing everything on X in her artwork. All the faces of these people that were up to bad things. It only got 5.7 thousand views. This is coming from someone that's not a celebrity. This is coming from an average person. 5.7 thousand views with no context about exposing anyone. That is just not enough people seeing that piece of artwork to assume anything is wrong. And that's a big part of why I do these videos here. because the content that we investigate, some of it has not really been looked at. Some of it is very low number of eyes have been on that content. And I think it's important, one, to share it with you, and two, to give my context on it and to bring more light to the situation.
Raised. That's a significant detail, not because it draws any conclusion about Trump, but because it shows how specifically and urgently Farmer was trying to point investigators toward the full scope of what she believed was happening inside that world. While Maria Farmer's warnings went unheard for years, Epstein's network quietly kept growing, eventually reaching some of the biggest names in entertainment, including Courtney Love. Number 3. Courtney Love. Courtney Love built her name in the 90s as the front woman of Hole, one of the most abrasive and uncompromising rock bands of that decade, and her public persona had always been loud, chaotic, and completely unbothered by what people thought of her.
I completely agree. I wasn't a big Hole fan, although I was into that scene back then. Let me know if you knew Courtney Love, and outside of just being Kurt Cobain's girlfriend. I'm curious about you guys and your interaction with that music.
So when her name turned up in Jeffrey Epstein's address book, she did not stay quiet about it. Love was clear from the start that she had never actually met Epstein. Her number was in his book, but there was no relationship behind it. No social history, no encounters at parties or dinners or any of the other venues where his world and the celebrity world tended to overlap. She was a name on a list, and nothing more than that, which is exactly what made the address book worth paying attention to in the first place. It was a 92-page document containing close to 2,000 names of presidents, royalty, financiers, scientists, Hollywood figures, socialites, and when it became public, the immediate assumption from a lot of people was that everyone listed in it must have had some kind of meaningful relationship with Epstein. That assumption made a certain surface-level sense, but it turned out to be wrong in a lot of cases, and investigators and journalists who actually dug into the book noted pretty quickly that being listed in it didn't automatically mean anything about the nature of the contact. Epstein had a well-documented habit of collecting names, adding people to his network through brief encounters or through third parties, and then using the sheer volume and prestige of that list to make himself look more connected. The book was more a tool he used to manufacture credibility. Love's name and number were in there. And once that became public knowledge in the aftermath of his 2019 arrest, she got on Twitter and addressed it head-on. He used famous people as props, essentially, whether those people had any real relationship with him or not. Their names in his book implied association, and implied association implied legitimacy. And that legitimacy is part of what allowed him to keep moving through the world the way he did for as long as he did. In a now-deleted tweet, she finished her thoughts on the matter by saying she hoped he burned in hell, which, given the context, was about as straightforward a statement as you can make.
Yeah, that's exactly the kind of statement I would expect to be made by Courtney Love.
And if Courtney Love's comments showed how far Epstein's name had spread through celebrity circles, the real pressure against him was beginning to come from somewhere else entirely: the courtroom. Number 4. Bradley Edwards. Bradley Edwards spent most of his career as a civil attorney in Florida. He handled cases, represented clients, and operated within the relatively contained world of South Florida law. But that changed in 2008 when a woman named Courtney Wild came to him for help. Wild had been sexually abused by Jeffrey Epstein starting when she was 14 years old. By the time she found Edwards, something had already happened in her case that she didn't fully understand. Something that would end up consuming the next decade and a half of Edwards' professional life. What Wild didn't know yet, and what Edwards discovered as he started digging into her situation, was that federal prosecutors had quietly signed an agreement with Epstein that effectively buried the case. The deal had been negotiated by Alexander Acosta, who was the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida at the time, and what it gave Epstein was extraordinary. He pleaded guilty to 2 state charges, registered as a sex offender, and served 13 months in county jail, during which he was allowed to leave the facility 6 days a week for work release. In exchange, federal prosecution was taken off the table entirely. The agreement extended immunity not just to Epstein, but to unnamed co-conspirators as well. The victims were never told this deal was being made, they were never consulted, never notified. By the time any of them found out it existed, it was already signed. Edwards started pushing back on it immediately, and the police around Epstein made clear pretty quickly that they weren't going to tolerate that. Epstein filed a lawsuit against Edwards personally, a $100 million lawsuit designed to drain his resources, damage his reputation, and make the cost of continuing the fight high enough that a reasonable person would walk away. But Edwards didn't walk away. He kept filing civil suits on behalf of survivors, kept holding press conferences, kept arguing in court that what the government had done was illegal, and kept trying to get the agreement thrown out. He kept saying the deal ignored a law that says victims have to be kept in the loop. The government, for years, just said they didn't do anything wrong. The $100 million lawsuit Epstein filed against Edwards collapsed. By 2018, Epstein was forced to settle it and issue an apology, which was a remarkable outcome given that the whole point of the suit had been to intimidate Edwards into silence.
It's crazy to me that so many names on this list, and some that you're about to hear as well, you don't even know who these people are. Now, Courtney Love, sure, but the others, like, they're names you've probably maybe heard of, but never in connection with anything relating to Epstein. So I really like this one because it's not just the Mel Gibsons and the Justin Biebers of the world. It's others that are a little bit more hidden in society that really aren't listened to.
It didn't work, and the apology was a public acknowledgement that it hadn't worked. Then in 2019, a federal judge ruled that the government had in fact broken the law by concealing the immunity deal from the victims. Edwards had been saying exactly that for over a decade, filing motions and making arguments in a case that most of the country had completely stopped paying attention to. The ruling validated everything he'd been arguing, and the legal pressure it created, combined with new reporting on Epstein's activities, fed directly into what happened next. Later that same year, federal prosecutors in New York arrested Epstein on sex trafficking charges. He died in his cell in August 2019, officially ruled a suicide before the case ever went to trial. Edwards had spent roughly 11 years keeping this case alive when almost no one else was paying attention to it. He wrote about the whole experience in a book called Relentless Pursuit, which documents the litigation, the threats, the dead ends, and the slow process of trying to hold a system accountable that had gone out of its way to protect one of its own. The book makes clear just how carefully the original case was buried, and how many institutional mistakes had to happen at the same time for Epstein to walk away in 2008 with such a light deal. After Epstein's death, Edwards turned his attention to the banks that had knowingly helped him. In 2023, he was lead lawyer in a lawsuit against two major banks, saying they had handled his payments and accounts long after his 2008 conviction, fully aware of what he was doing. JP Morgan Chase settled for $290 million. Deutsche Bank settled for $75 million, and the money went to survivors. When the sealed Epstein files began releasing in 2025, Edwards was one of the loudest voices demanding full transparency from the Justice Department and pushing for every remaining accomplice to be publicly identified. He had been making that same demand, in one form or another, since 2008. But while Bradley Edwards fought Epstein in court on behalf of victims, some of the most powerful testimonies came from the survivors themselves. Number 5. Virginia Giuffre. Virginia Giuffre grew up in tough situations, moving from place to place as a kid, and by her teenage years she was mostly on her own, making her exactly the kind of vulnerable young girl Epstein could take advantage of. She was 16 and working as a spa attendant in Mar-a-Lago, Donald Trump's Palm Beach club, when a woman approached her and struck up a conversation.
She said, I've got a person that I know who's actually looking for a traveling masseuse.
That woman was Ghislaine Maxwell, and the conversation was the beginning of something that would take Giuffre years to fully escape and decades to fully reckon with in public.
It still boggles my mind when you look at a picture of Maxwell, how she, as a human, can go and take these innocent girls and bring them into the hands of the devil. Like, she is one evil person.
Maxwell recruited her into Epstein's world under the guise of a legitimate job opportunity, as Giuffre was told she could train to become a masseuse for a wealthy man who paid well and had important connections. But what actually happened was that she was trafficked.
That's when I was instructed to get undressed and have with Jeffrey Epstein while Ghislaine Maxwell was participating as well.
She was 16, and over the years that followed, she says she was flown around the world and made available to powerful men in multiple countries. She was named royalty, politicians, academics, and businessmen.
This is a real photo.
And that was the first time you met him?
And that's the very first time I met him. And that's right before I was abused by him.
She was just a teenager when it started, trapped in a system that made sure the people he used had nowhere to turn and no one would believe them. Eventually, she got out and began trying to rebuild her life. Over the years, she moved to Australia, got married, and had children, but she never stayed silent about what had happened. In 2009, now in her mid-20s, Giuffre filed a lawsuit against Epstein's estate. The suit laid out in detail her experiences, the recruitment in Mar-a-Lago, the trafficking to wealthy and powerful men, and the years of abuse. The case settled confidentially for $500,000, and the documents were sealed. The money was real, but the silence that came with the settlement meant that most of the details stayed buried for years. She kept moving anyway. In 2011, she sold her story to the British tabloid The Mail on Sunday, and with it came the photograph, the image of a teenage Giuffre standing next to Prince Andrew with Ghislaine Maxwell visible in the background. During the same period, Giuffre was also giving detailed testimony to the FBI. She was providing names, locations, and specifics about how the network operated, and that testimony fed into the investigative groundwork that would eventually support the federal charges filed against Epstein in 2019.
She's so dangerous to all of these elites because she holds maybe more secrets than anyone else in the industry.
He was doing this years before the rest of the world caught up to what she was describing. The legal move that ended up mattering most in terms of long-term consequences came in 2015, when Giuffre filed a defamation lawsuit against Ghislaine Maxwell. Maxwell had publicly called her an absolute and total liar, and Giuffre sued her for it. After that, the lawsuits produced tons of depositions, sworn statements, and documents, but most of it was quickly locked away by the court. And similar to how Virginia Giuffre kept speaking out about Epstein for years, others connected to the scandal also began quietly distancing themselves from him, just like in this next case. Number 6. Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie. Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie grew up in the British royal family. They were Andrew's daughters. For most of their lives, that was a complicated but manageable thing to be. Andrew had his controversies, but he was still a working royal, still showing up at official engagements and still part of the institution. The girls built their own lives alongside that reality as Beatrice moved into the tech sector. Eugenie entered the arts world, both of them carving out identities that weren't entirely defined by their royal titles. That became significantly harder to do as the Epstein story started pulling Andrew deeper into its center. Andrew's friendship with Jeffrey Epstein was long-standing and well-documented. He had visited Epstein's various properties, been photographed with him after Epstein's 2008 conviction, and maintained the friendship publicly even as the questions around it grew louder. When Virginia Giuffre's allegations against Andrew became a major news story, the details she put forward were specific and damaging. She said she had been trafficked to Andrew on 3 separate occasions, and one of those encounters took place at Ghislaine Maxwell's London townhouse, another at Epstein's New York mansion, and a third at his private island in the U.S. Virgin Islands. All while Andrew has consistently denied all of it. The multiple accounts from people close to the family, Beatrice and Eugenie, were not taking any of this in stride. Royal insiders described them as appalled as the full scope of what Epstein had done became clearer, and as their father's proximity to him became harder to contextualize or explain away. The word that kept appearing in reports from people familiar with their private reactions was duped, that they felt their father had been used, or had allowed himself to be used, in ways that were now reflecting on the entire family in ways they couldn't control. Eugenie's response, over time, took a specific shape. In 2017, she co-founded an organization called the Anti-Slavery Collective, a charity focused on combating modern slavery and human trafficking. She built it into a genuine platform, using her access and her profile to push the issue into conversations where it might not otherwise have landed.
She clearly knew what was going on with her father and had also another one with information, but is putting it out in a different way, not getting behind a microphone or getting into interviews, but instead doing other things that are really exposing what was happening with the files.
Royal watchers and commentators noted consistently that the work felt pointed, that a princess whose father was publicly accused of benefiting from a trafficking network had chosen to spend her time and her name fighting against exactly that kind of exploitation. She never said that out loud in those terms, but the alignment was hard to miss. She kept the work going through the years that followed, even as the Epstein story continued developing in the background. The Epstein files, the large-scale release of previously sealed emails and documents that began generating headlines in 2024 and accelerated through 2025 and into 2026, made things worse for the York family in a fresh wave. The documents contained new material involving Andrew, and some of it touched on Sarah Ferguson as well, their mother, which sources close to the family said hit Beatrice and Eugenie particularly hard. By early 2026, reports showed that the sisters had put significant distance between themselves and Andrew's residence at Royal Lodge, and that the dynamic within the branch of the family had become strained in ways that were increasingly difficult to paper over with official statements. The scrutiny had also started to affect Eugenie's charity work in direct ways. In March 2026, she stepped down as patron of Anti-Slavery International, an organization with a long history of work in the field. The reason, as it was said, was that the ongoing attention on her family had become a distraction from the charity's mission, that her association was doing more harm than good to the cause she had been trying to advance. It was a significant step, and it reflected how thoroughly the Epstein fallout had spread outward from Andrew himself. Around the same time, reports began that both sisters had been quietly kept off the guest lists for certain high society events,
Of course.
including Royal Ascot, as the Department of Justice's continued document releases kept the story active, and the optics around the York name remained difficult. They hadn't done anything themselves to warrant exclusion, but the name carried weight that the institutions around them were trying to manage carefully. Neither Beatrice nor Eugenie has publicly called out their father. They haven't done interviews about it or put out statements criticizing him. Instead, they mostly just kept their distance and focused on their own lives, and in Eugenie's case, she's even supported causes that go against everything Epstein stood for. Whether that reads as a warning or simply a self-preservation depends on how you're looking at it, but the distance itself has been consistent and by 2026, increasingly visible.
So those are 6 names. How many of those are brand new names that you've never heard of before? There definitely were a few on the list that were new to me. Let me know your thoughts down below. And if you want to dive deeper into the files and people getting exposed, this is one that you're going to enjoy. I'll see you guys over there.